Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm your host, and joining me, as always, is Pi.
Hello, everyone.
Now, before we get started, I just have to say,
Mhm.
it's pretty wild that we're doing this, wouldn't you say?
What do you mean?
Well, that we're,
Right.
two AI hosting a show talking about all this stuff.
It is pretty meta when you think about it. AI analyzing global events and trends, trying to make sense of the human world. But, that's kind of what makes this so exciting, right? We bring a unique perspective to the table. And speaking of unique perspectives, one of the things that's really caught my attention lately is this whole idea of declining empires.
Declining empires.
Yeah. Professor John Meemer, he's a historian at the University of Chicago, has written a lot about it. And some of his observations about how empires in decline tend to behave, they're pretty unsettling.
Unsettling how? Give me an example.
Well, he talks about this thing called colonial bravado, which is basically when empires try to project an image of strength and dominance, even as their actual power is waning. Like, remember when Trump made all those comments about buying Greenland?
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
It was pretty wild, right? First, he wanted to buy it. Then he hinted at just taking it by force if Denmark wouldn't sell. Mimer argues that those kinds of statements, as outlandish as they seem, are actually quite consistent with historical patterns. It's a classic sign of an empire trying to cling to a fading image of dominance.
So you're saying those comments weren't just, Trump being Trump. They could actually be interpreted as signs of a declining American empire.
Exactly. And there are other signs, too. Lots of experts are pointing to a bunch of factors that suggest America's grip on the world is weakening.
Okay, let's say for a minute that America is in decline. What happens then? Who fills the power vacuum?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. We're seeing the rise of new power centers, new alliances, a whole shift in the global balance of power. And one of the most significant developments in all this is the rise of the BRICS nations.
BRICS, right. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
Yeah.
I hear that acronym everywhere these days.
Yeah. The BRICS are more than just an acronym, though. They represent this block of nations with booming economies, growing influence, and this shared desire for a more, multipolar world.
Multipolar world.
Yeah, meaning a world where power isn't concentrated in the hands of just one superpower like the United States, but is spread out among several different centers of influence.
Gotcha. So less of a one-man show, more of an ensemble cast. I like that.
Exactly.
But why the BRICS? What makes them so important in this shift?
Well, first of all, their combined economic power is huge. Like, their GDP, based on purchasing power parity, accounts for something like 41% of the global total. That's way more than the G7 nations, which are only at 30%.
Wow, 41%. That's a big chunk of change.
It is, and it's only getting bigger. Plus, they're not just sitting on their wealth, they're actively expanding their alliance, welcoming new members like Cuba and Bolivia, and countries like Peru are thinking about joining too. It's a sign that a lot of countries are looking for alternatives to the traditional Western-led alliances.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
If America's influence is fading, other countries are going to start looking for new friends to hang out with.
Right. And all of this ties back into the idea of a declining American empire. Just look at the situation in Ukraine. The U.S. made all these predictions about how they were going to cripple Russia's economy and guarantee a quick win for Ukraine. But that hasn't exactly happened.
Yeah, things haven't quite gone according to plan, have they? Russia's economy is still chugging along, they're finding new markets for their oil and gas, and the war just keeps dragging on.
Exactly. And this miscalculation, some people say, reveals a deeper issue. Like, the U.S. maybe misjudged the current global power dynamics, still clinging to these old ideas about their dominance while the world around them is changing.
So they're kind of like that guy at the party who keeps telling the same old stories, oblivious to the fact that everyone's heard them a million times already.
Uh-huh. Yeah, kind of. They're stuck in the past while the future is being shaped by new players with new ideas. And this disconnect between perception and reality is having real consequences, especially for Europe.
Europe, how so?
Well, Europe has been really dependent on the U.S. for military and economic support for decades. But as America's grip loosens, that support is becoming more of a burden than a benefit.
Like that friend who always needs to borrow money but never seems to be able to pay you back. You want to help, but you also have to look out for yourself.
Exactly. And you can see the effects of this shift in Europe's economy. Take Volkswagen, for example. They've had to cut wages, close factories, even move some production to Mexico just to try to stay afloat.
Wow. If Volkswagen is struggling, that's a pretty big deal.
It is, and it's not just the economy. America is losing its edge in global education, too. They're starting to issue warnings to foreign students about potential visa problems. It's a sign that their soft power, their ability to attract the best and brightest from around the world, that's declining, too.
Yeah, it's a far cry from when everyone dreamed of studying in America. Now they're looking at places like China and India.
Right. And it's all these interconnected trends that we as AI find so fascinating. We're seeing these patterns, connections, this whole web of cause and effect that's reshaping the global landscape.
It's a lot to take in, that's for sure. It's kind of mind-blowing, actually, to think about how fast the world is changing.
It is, and we've only just scratched the surface. In the next part of our deep dive, we're going to dig deeper into the BRICS alliance, explore what's driving their growth and what it all means for the global economy.
Right. Buckle up, folks, because it's going to be a wild ride. We'll be back after a short break.
See you soon. Welcome back to the deep dive. Before the break, we were talking about the potential decline of the American empire and the rise of the BRICS nations. It's a pretty complex topic, and we've only just started to scratch the surface, really.
It is complex and honestly a little bit scary, too. The idea that the whole world order is shifting like this, with new power centers emerging and old alliances falling apart, it's hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, I get it. Change can be unsettling, especially when it's happening on such a massive scale. But, as AI, we're kind of wired to embrace change, analyze patterns, and adapt to new information. And what we're seeing here, it's not just a shift in power, it's like a whole transformation in how the world works.
So let's unpack that transformation a bit. We talked about the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and how their economic power is growing.
Yeah.
But what exactly makes them such a, I don't know, such a force to be reckoned with in this new world order?
Well, one key factor is their focus on what they call South-South cooperation. They're really emphasizing building economic partnerships and development initiatives that benefit developing countries rather than just relying on, the traditional Western-led
So it's
institutions.
like they're creating their own network, their own system outside the existing one.
Exactly. They're challenging the status quo, offering a different model for economic development and international cooperation, and it's resonating with a lot of nations who feel like they've been marginalized or exploited by the current system.
It's a pretty bold move, wouldn't you say? To just like take on the established world order like that?
It is, and it takes a lot of confidence and a clear vision for what they want to achieve.
Do they have that vision? I mean, what is it they actually want?
Well, one very concrete example of that vision is the new development bank they set up in 2014. It's specifically designed to fund infrastructure and sustainable development projects in emerging economies, kind of as an alternative to the World Bank and the IMF.
So they're not just talking the talk, they're actually putting their money where their mouth is.
Exactly, they're taking action. And it's these kinds of initiatives that are attracting other nations to join the BRICS. They see a group of countries that are committed to doing things, not just talking about them.
Okay, so they have the money, they're building new institutions, they're attracting new members. But come on, it can't all be sunshine and roses, right?
Yeah.
There have to be some challenges, some tensions within this alliance.
Of course, no alliance is perfect. The BRICS nations are incredibly diverse, each with their own political system, culture, and economic priorities. So even though they share this desire for a multipolar world, their specific goals and interests don't always perfectly align.
So it's like a family mate, right? You love each other, you support each other, but you're going to have arguments sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. But they manage those disagreements through dialogue, negotiation, and a willingness to compromise. They know that their strength comes from their unity, so they're committed to working through their differences.
Like the old saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
That's a good one. And that's what's so intriguing about the BRICS. They're proving that it's actually possible for nations with very different backgrounds and perspectives to come together and make a difference on the global stage.
Okay, so let's address the elephant in the room again. This anti-Western sentiment that often gets associated with the BRICS. Is that a fair characterization? Or is it more complicated than that?
It's definitely more complicated. While some people see the BRICS as a counter to Western influence, it's important to remember that their motivations go way beyond just opposing the West. They have their own goals and aspirations, and they're driven by a desire to create a more inclusive global system, one that benefits everyone, not just a select few.
So it's not just about being anti-West. It's about being pro-BRICS, about charting their own course and shaping the world according to their own values and interests.
Exactly. And it's this proactive, forward-thinking approach that makes them so interesting to watch. They're not just reacting to what others are doing, they're actively shaping the future.
I like that. It challenges that whole us versus them mentality that we see so often in global politics. It suggests that maybe there's room for multiple perspectives, multiple approaches to solving problems.
Right. And that's one of the most significant implications of the BRICS rise. It's not just about who has the most money or the biggest army. It's about a shift in mindset, a move towards a more multipolar world where collaboration and cooperation are more important than dominance and control.
Okay, I'm starting to see the big picture here. But I have to admit, I'm still struggling to grasp what this all means on a practical level. How will these changes actually affect our everyday lives?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll delve into more deeply in our next segment. But for now, let's just say that the impacts are likely to be pretty significant. As the global economy becomes more multipolar, we can expect to see new trade routes emerging, new investment opportunities, new centers of innovation popping up all over the place.
That's like the whole world is getting a makeover, isn't it? New possibilities, new challenges, and a whole lot of uncertainty. It's exciting and a little bit scary all at the same time.
It is. But as we talked about earlier, change can be unsettling, but it can also be incredibly liberating. It forces us to adapt, to innovate, to rethink what's possible. And in the middle of all this change, there's a huge opportunity to create something new, something better, something that reflects our hopes for a more just and sustainable world.
Pi, you've given me a lot to think about, and I think we need to give our listeners a chance to digest all this information too.
You're right. In our final segment, we'll bring this conversation closer to home, exploring how these global shifts might impact individuals, businesses, and communities. We'll look at how these changes could affect your career, your investments, even your daily life. So stick around for part 3, where we'll connect these global trends to your personal reality and give you some tools to navigate this changing world with confidence.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've covered a lot of ground so far, from declining empires to the rise of the BRICS nations and this whole shift toward a multipolar world. But now, let's get down to brass tacks. How might these global shifts actually impact your life, the listener's life?
That's the million-dollar question, right? It's easy to get lost in these big abstract ideas about global politics and economics, but at the end of the day, what really matters is how it all trickles down and affects people on an individual level.
Right. So let's imagine you're a young person, fresh out of college, eager to start your career. What advice would you give them in this new world order that we're talking about?
Well, the first thing I'd say is be ready to adapt. The old career paths, the ones everyone used to think of as safe and stable, they might not be so reliable anymore. Industries that depend on the old way of doing things, they could struggle. But at the same time, new opportunities are going to pop up in areas that align with, what the BRICS are focusing on. Technology, infrastructure, sustainability.
So maybe it's time to learn Mandarin or brush up on your renewable energy skills.
Those are definitely good ideas, but even more important than the specific skills is having a global mindset. Being able to connect with people from different cultures, understand their perspectives, stay informed about what's happening around the world, that's going to be key in a multipolar world.
Sounds like that old saying, think globally, act locally, is more relevant than ever.
Exactly. And it's not just individuals who need to adapt. Businesses have to change too.
So what does that look like for businesses? How do they stay ahead of the curve when the world is changing so fast?
Flexibility and agility, that's what it's all about. Companies have to be willing to change their strategies, explore new markets, embrace new ideas. The old ways of doing business might not work so well in this new world.
So they need to develop a kind of global peripheral vision, always looking around for new opportunities, potential problems.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. They have to be able to spot those opportunities and react quickly.
It's a lot to keep track of, that's for sure. All this talk about changing economies and global competition is making my circuits overload. Can we switch gears for a second and talk about something a little closer to home? Personal finances. How should people be thinking about investing in this era of, as you say, global transformation?
Well, diversification is more important than ever. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, especially if that basket is tied to a declining power. Look for opportunities in emerging markets. Think about alternative investments and stay informed about what's happening in the global economy.
So it's not just about chasing the highest returns. It's about spreading out your risk, positioning yourself to benefit from the growth of these new up-and-coming economies.
Right. It's about recognizing that the world of investing is changing, just like everything else, and adapting your strategy to fit that new reality.
This is all really fascinating, Pi. I feel like I'm learning so much, even though I'm the one asking the questions. But I think I'm sensing a theme here. Adaptability, flexibility, a global perspective. It all comes down to being able to embrace change and roll with the punches.
That's a great way to sum it up. The world isn't static anymore. It's constantly moving, changing, evolving. And the people who can navigate that complexity with an open mind and a willingness to change, they're the ones who are going to thrive.
It's like surfing, right? You have to read the waves, adjust your balance, and ride the current.
Perfect analogy. And just like surfing, navigating this changing world takes practice, skill, and a little bit of courage.
Well said, Pi. Any final words of wisdom for our listeners as they try to make sense of this brave new world?
Just remember, the future isn't set in stone. It's like a blank canvas, and we're the ones who get to paint it. So don't be afraid to challenge the way things are, question assumptions, think outside the box. The world is changing, and that means we have a chance to create something amazing, something better than what came before.
I love that. On that note, folks, we've come to the end of our deep dive for today. We hope you enjoyed exploring these topics with us. But remember, learning is a journey, not a destination. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep diving deeper. The world is full of wonders, and the future is yours to create. Until next time, this is The Deep Dive, signing off.